1, 2, 3, 4. I got thoughts running through my head. I got thoughts, can't you see? I got thoughts, the books I read. I got thoughts, won't you listen to me?
Hello, and welcome to a special edition of The Author Has Thoughts. Today is New Year's Eve, some last video of 2019, which you won't see till 2020, but I figured I'd do something a little different. I'm going to call this the Various and Sundries, which is just me thinking, making random thoughts, talking about some stuff that's been on my mind lately. So first things first, the next series of videos after I get done with the Memory Void, which came before this one, whenever I put it out, the next one's going to be on my next Bridge Chronicles book, which is If Tribe Equals, the third book, my favorite book in the series, at least so far. But I got a lot of thoughts on that one, a lot I can tear into on that one, but I kind of want to take this as just a little pause, let's talk about some other stuff. Everybody has a Rise of Skywalker Star Wars review, so I figured I might as well throw mine out there on the internet because, if you're on YouTube, you have to review the latest Star Wars movie. It's a bit shit. There, review done. Seriously, I could probably spend hours talking about how bad this movie was on almost every level. I'm kind of dispensing with it a little bit quickly because it's just not good. I mean, you could pick apart every single scene and there are just structural problems, writing problems. Actors, no problem with the actors. The actors did fine with what they had. What they had, unfortunately, was just a big pile of shit. It was just terribly written, terribly thought about, a threadbare video game script, and I say that in a pejorative sense because it just really was that bad. I will give one bit of credit to it. It actually made me like Kylo Ren as a character. And I have hated that character since he took his mask off in the first one. He just was whiny emo douche. But Adam Driver's a good actor, and they actually wrote him something interesting in this. And it was really the only piece of decent writing in the thing. But everything else around it was just loud and obnoxious, and instead of calling it Rise of Skywalker, they should have called it Context is for Assholes, because there was none. From the minute the crawl starts with, and there was a message from Emperor Palpatine that is then quickly forgotten and nobody knows what the message was, or is just like, okay, whatever. From there forward, it was just utter trash. And I hate to say it because I kind of liked Force Awakens. And, I saw Star Wars as a kid in the theater. This series is it's The Mandalorian is the only thing keeping this series going because everything else has been trash. At least that I've seen. The movies especially. They've just been awful. Solo was not good. Solo was not bad, but it wasn't good. It wasn't necessary. Rogue One of my favorites. Rise of Skywalker, completely forgettable other than how bad it was. So now what I really wanted to talk about in this one is Watchmen. And the reason I'm talking about this now is because I did watch the HBO show, and as a result of that, I've gone back and I've reread Watchmen. It's been quite a few years since I read it, maybe a few years after release, but I've probably read it, before, between now and then. Then I went back and read the Beyond Watchmen stuff that they put out in like 2015, and so I have things to say about Watchmen, specifically some character study stuff. I wanted to do like a character study, take one character, or one or two characters actually, in Watchmen. And again, this started with me watching the Watchmen TV show on HBO. Now, from the get-go, I've been skeptical of the project, of the Watchmen TV show. Number one, it's written by Damon Lindelof, who has done some things I like in the past, Lost being a major example, but has done a lot of really garbage. Into Star Trek Into Darkness, He did Prometheus, and both were just lazily written trash. Big budget trash. It really was a shame because the franchises they were part of were franchises I really like and was hoping for good things out of. Just trash. Just lazy writing. And I have not watched things that he's been involved with specifically because of his script writing involvement. So I was skeptical. The first trailers appeared, and I was completely lost. It's totally confusing. I'm looking at it going, how in any way does what I'm seeing on the trailers connect to either the Watchmen movie or the Watchmen, comic book? And to his credit, he kept me watching. First few episodes was still kind of, what is going on? Why am I watching this? By the middle of the season, I was definitely hooked. I was watching it like the night it came on, which is something I never do for TV. I watch it on DVR. I really got involved. I'm not sure he quite stuck the landing. There was some good parts about it. I didn't like the last little scene because it felt like one of his "fuck you, I don't want to answer the questions" endings. And I'm not somebody who has to have every question answered, but I think there are certain character arcs that need to be answered that were not answered. However, that said, it was still a good series. It was very much worth watching. There are definitely some parts that were going to piss people off and will turn a certain audience segment off. Essentially, if you're politically conservative, you're probably not going to want to watch it. I've heard it described as the woke fantasy. I can sort of see that. Or I can certainly see people who are uncomfortable about things like Black Lives Matter and reparations and discussions like that. Totally not going to watch it. But it was extremely well acted. The series was saved, I think, by some fantastic acting, particularly Gene Smart, Tim Blake Nelson, and Regina King. I think they all did fantastic with the roles they were given. The thing that has come up, and I think a lot of the people who would criticize the show for being too woke or whatever, is the use of the 7th Cavalry, basically the white supremacist group that all have taken the Rorschach mask as their motif. And speaking with a friend of mine about it, and the Rorschach speech from his journal.
Rorschach's journal, October 12th, 1985. Dog carcass in alley this morning. Tire tread on burst stomach. This city's afraid of me. I've seen its true face. The streets are extended gutters, and the gutters are full of blood. And when the drains finally scab over, all the vermin will drown. The accumulated filth of all their sex and murder will foam up around their waists. And all the whores and politicians will look up and shout, "Save us." And I'll whisper, "No."
They kind of echo it in the first episode when they send their video message, and I'll try to link it and find both versions. Originally, I thought what they had said was the same speech. It's not the same speech, and if I find the video versions, I'll compare the two. There are definitely some changes.
Cop carcass on the highway last night. Soon the accumulated black filth will be hosed away, and the streets of Tulsa will turn into extended gutters, overflowing with liberal tears. Soon all the whores and race traitors will shout, "Save us," and we will whisper, "No."
And the changes were very much to bring it in line with where the writer clearly wanted to go, with basically a mirror on the white supremacy that we're seeing such a rise in today, and the right-wing fascism and that sort of thing. And a friend of mine had said, that's not what Rorschach was about. Well, I've reread Watchmen, and yes, the two speeches are different. The two monologues, whatever, they're different. They mention a few different targets, and clearly the 7th Cavalry is more takes more racist bent to it. Though the speeches are different, there's not a far step from where Rorschach was in the 80s to where the right-wing conservative movement and libertarian movement has gone in the 2000 teens, 2K teens. I don't think Rorschach would have marched at Charlottesville, but I do think there is a certain evolution of the political ideas he was espousing in the 80s with, what the conservative movement is espousing now, what the Republican Party and the GOP and all that have become. Like I said, I think the 7th Cavalry white supremacists in the Watchmen TV series come off as a bit of a caricature. It's still not, I still don't think it's as far from the Rorschach thing as some people might say. And that that made me want to reread the original series. And in that, I wanted to discuss the character of Rorschach. A little bit of history on the Watchmen series. Originally, DC Comics had bought these characters from Charlton, I believe it's Charlton Comics. Including characters like Blue Beetle, The Question, Peacemaker, Human Target, Nightshade, Captain Atom, a few others. And originally they bought them and said, okay, let's do these characters up. Hey, Alan Moore, who was at the time writing a very critically acclaimed run on Swamp Thing, said, Alan Moore, do these characters up. Let's give you a prestige format miniseries. And this was back in the days when, comics were still, I think most of them were under $1, and only the independents were really selling the kind of really nicely done non-cheap newsprint kind of editions. And I think in '84, Frank Miller had done Ronin for DC, which was a 4-issue miniseries, but it was done with better quality paper and a little thicker and all that, and was gorgeous. And then I believe in the run-up to what became Watchmen, at about the same time, they were also doing the prestige format Dark Knight Returns with Frank Miller. So there was two of the most seminal comic book works of the last 40 years, in my opinion, came out right around the same time and made a huge impact on me as a teenager and as a writer and an artist. So they said, Alan Moore, write us up a treatment for these characters. So Moore went and did one. And they realized, as DC realized, that these characters, they were done when he was done with them. There was nothing left. So they were like, okay, we're going to fold these characters into the regular DC Comics universe, and you take this really good story and just make some other characters about it. So all of the main characters in Watchmen are in some way based off those Charlton characters, although I keep forgetting who Ozymandias is based off of. They were all based off something. So Night Owl, Blue Beetle became Night Owl, both older Night Owl and younger Night Owl. Nightshade became Silk Spectre. Captain Atom became Dr. Manhattan. And The Question became Rorschach. I think Peacemaker might have been Comedian. But The Question became Rorschach. Complete with the no-face mask with the shifting colors and all that, shifting shadows. Very much based on Steve Ditko's work on The Question. I believe it was Ditko that did that character. There were the Watchmen characters, and he created them all off of these Charlton comics, but he also created them as kind of an archetype of typical superhero characters. So you had, the Ubermensch, the Superman character in Dr. Manhattan, taken to that nth degree of what if Superman really had no weaknesses other than humanity, or what shreds of humanity he had left. What if you took The Question, who's very much I want to say he's a Batman character, but he's not exactly like a Batman character. He really does fit The Question more, but if you take that normal human, very authoritarian vigilante type character, and then you make him crazy as fuck, like Batman would be. Because if you look at Night Owl, he's also kind of a Batman character, but he's more that Dark Knight detective, gadgety type Blue Beetle archetype of Batman than the more gritty, authoritarian, realistic Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns type of Batman character. So Batman's one of those archetypes. There's a lot of difference based on who's writing him and what facet of his character they take. Well, Moore was writing specific facets of characters as his as his archetype for these characters. So the question was, or the question became Rorschach, who was very morally uncompromising, but very authoritarian, vigilante type who had very specific things he believed in. Rorschach, as an archetype, is very recognizable, and Alan Moore has spoken about that character a lot because Rorschach became one of those characters that was kind of a fan favorite out of the Watchmen. He was the guy that a number of people thought was the hero, possibly because of his uncompromising morality. It's right or it's wrong, and I believe in right, and this is what I'm going to do no matter what. And it's funny, that archetype is something that I've, in the last few years as a writer, kind of recognized from the 80s. 80s action movies were very different from 70s and earlier action movies. We had 70s Dirty Dozen, a lot of war type movies, which is funny because that's a complete contrast to the whole Vietnam War thing and how we saw soldiers then. But in the 80s, action movies kind of morphed into these weird maverick authoritarian libertarian ideals. So you had the archetype of that action hero who was not going to let pesky things like rules and regulations and laws stop him from doing what he believes is right. So you had Beverly Hills Cop, perfect example. The Beverly Hills Cop, Lethal Weapon, Cobra, I think was another one, where you had the Maverick Cop. The Dirty Harry was probably the originator of that came out of like Death Wish movies. But it's that character that, though I'm a cop, the laws and the rules that cops have to follow are being abused by the criminals who are living outside the justice system, and so I have to break those rules, and I have to bring basically frontier justice to the mean streets of Chicago or Beverly Hills or wherever. And of course that is an offshoot of the frontiersman myth from the Wild Wild West and Western type movies. The sheriff he's the only law in town, and his word is law with it, and he rules with a 6-gun. He dispenses justice with a 6-gun. And it's that kind of evolution of that mentality into the 80s. And unfortunately, it's something that I've seen in the mentality that the right-wing politicians use to justify things like the Iraq War. Well, we have to get in there and stop them before there's a mushroom cloud. It's the 24 with Kiefer Sutherland's character always having to go against go against CTU or whatever the name of his organization was, to go rogue to stop the people in this ticking time bomb scenario, and anything that I do, torture is justified, and all that. I know life imitates art, and 20 years after the fact, we have had a segment of the political sphere enacting that frontier justice, individual, I will dispense justice, and I know what's right, so I'm going to do what's right, even if it breaks a few laws or breaks a few eggs, right? Collateral damage, no big deal, right? And I've thought about that character a lot in the last, say, decade, a lot since I've been writing a lot of the Bridge Chronicles books. And Bridge, to a certain extent, embodies some of that, although clearly he's not an action hero, and he recognizes that, so he doesn't get involved with violence. He uses other people for his violence. But it's that archetype that is very much like Rorschach, is this guy's going to get away in the criminal justice system, so I'm going to kill him. I'm going to dismember the guy. I'll throw him out a window. That sort of thing. And that character is all well and good in a fictional context. But as soon as you take that archetype and you actually think about it for more than 2 seconds, that's not the archetype we want. That's not what we want our police to be. I don't. We don't want our police to be judge, jury, and executioner. We don't want Dirty Harry out there. Because what if he's wrong? The whole point of our criminal justice system is that you are innocent until proven guilty. And if one cop decides that you're guilty and can break any rule, plant any evidence, torture you, abduct you, harass you, whatever, to prove that you're guilty, even if you're not, then that becomes a police state that none of us want to live with. We've seen that kind of police state in dictatorships and authoritarian places. And that kind of mentality in a real life context is what makes a character like Rorschach or Dirty Harry so dangerous, in that people believe that, as the audience, we see that his morality is correct, right? We see that Dirty Harry knows that guy did it, and, the courts will let him walk on a technicality, but I know he did it, so I'm going to go kill him. And again, I do not want that in a system. I do not want a Lethal Weapon action set piece playing out on the streets of my hometown when I'm trying to go to work, right? I want calm streets, peaceful streets. And I also don't want a whole class of people, or in the 7th Cavalry's case, a whole race of people, feeling oppressed to the point where they come and they start causing trouble because their rights are being taken away. They should have the same opportunities I do. So, again, Rorschach is that archetype. And I'll put a quote up here if I can find it from Alan Moore, where he said, I think he was talking to some fans about Rorschach. And they were like, Rorschach's the greatest, he's so awesome. And Alan Moore goes, are you crazy? He's not the hero of this piece. As a matter of fact, if you look at the piece, there really isn't a hero in the piece. They're all bad. Even the heroes, and I don't just mean the heroes are, they're perverts, or they're morally compromised or any of that. I mean, they're not heroes. They do some things that, in the past, they do some things where they might save some people or catch some criminals and that sort of thing. But if you, and I'm going to give spoilers away from Watchmen, if you read Watchmen, you recognize there are no heroes in this story. Alan Moore was very distinctly saying, and he apparently distinctly said to this fan, Rorschach is not a hero. He's practically a Nazi. And when I was reading it in my teens, and again, I was a young Republican dumbass, hadn't really lived life, and didn't really recognize it at the time, but as I look now, Silk Spectre at one point says that Rorschach's practically a Nazi, and the magazine that he sends his journal to in the end is very clearly a fascist, or proto-fascist kind of rag. If you look at the character of the editor was drawn, Dave Gibbons drew him, he looks like he's a Nazi. He looks like, he could have come right out of the 40s, and that was very intentional. Alan Moore has said, Rorschach is a Nazi. He's pretty close. He's not a hero. And it isn't just because of his psychopathy. It isn't just because of the serious psychological damage Walter Kovacs had to go through. That has led to him being what he is. But what he is not a hero. It's somebody who, maybe he dispenses justice that needed to be dispensed, and maybe he saved some people, but at the same time, he's a nightmare. And Lindelof in the new TV series has taken what probably would happen in that, his words that were published would get taken up by somebody who maybe isn't quite on the same, isn't quite on the same wavelength. They took his words and went all racist with it, and he might not have cared about the racism part. But again, that's, the danger of words, is that somebody can take your words and go places you did not expect nor approve of. For instance, anybody who reads my Bridge Chronicles books, and thinks that I want corporate controlled open carry action movie place to live in, I don't. I don't at all. I mean, I actually think my examination of it is showing that I think it's a bad idea. It's a really bad idea to have corporate controlled governments and regulatory capture by corporations and the like. So yes, Rorschach, I think his words, though they were not the 7th Cavalry's words, I think very much he could have, that it isn't a far stretch from there to the 7th Cavalry. Now again, the 7th Cavalry in the show I thought was a bit of a caricature. They're kind of over the top. And that's one of the hard things about writing racist characters or racist movements and things like that, is that the irrationality of racism is hard to write without it sounding ridiculous, because it is ridiculous at its heart. It's, your skin color is determining that one person over the other is worth more on a global scale, simply on the skin color, not on the actions, not on the character, their morality, or any of that. It's just skin color. In that sense, racism is ridiculous. So it's hard to write a racist character without just resorting to, the worst stereotypes. And that kind of does an injustice to racism, not just to the character, because the character does need to have some genuine, you feel something genuine for the character. But it does disservice to the story, because even though, racism is somewhat of a ridiculous thought process anyway, you still have to deal with it as if somebody believed in it. It's like if I'm writing a religious character, and all I take about the religious characters is that I think religion is at times a cancerous, detriment to an individual's ability to think critically. If I don't at least take that character seriously, that character will not be a serious character. It will be a caricature.
I will look down on you, and I will say, no.